Thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here. I do want to acknowledge a few people who are here with us today. We're very pleased to be joined by Chief James Essig of the NYPD Firearms Investigation Division. We have received help from NYPD in obtaining this data, as we have from other law enforcement agencies around the state. We're also joined by Assemblyman Brian Kavanaugh, who's one of the leaders of Legislators Against Illegal Guns, which once upon a time I actually co-chaired. And on stage with me today are people in my office that made this amazing online tool and report possible. Nick Ciplina, my senior advisor and special counsel, Perry Kadenoff, chief of our Organized Crime Task Force, and Lacey Keller, our director of research and analytics, who also represents her entire team that did all of the work to make this amazing interactive platform available, which will be up online today, and which we'll be conducting a webinar for those who want to understand how to use it most effectively later. We're taking another important step forward today in the fight against the gun violence epidemic. As New York's top law enforcement officer, one of my top priorities has always been to curb the gun violence epidemic that has touched the lives of far too many New Yorkers. Every day, more than 300 Americans are shot. Every day, 90 Americans die from gun violence, and every day, 7 of those Americans who die are just kids or teenagers. Tragically, these statistics of violence and death have become all too familiar. But what has been less well known is just where the guns used in these shootings are coming from, and what we can do to stop them from getting into the hands of criminals. Well, today we take a major step to answer those questions, and we are releasing Targeting on Trafficking, a first-of-its-kind multi-year analysis of guns recovered by New York law enforcement. New York State has been a leader in the efforts to keep guns out of the hands of people who should not have them, while also respecting the rights of responsible gun owners. I'm very proud of the fact that I worked with New York's gun show operators, and uniquely among all the states. In New York, we closed the gun show loophole by collaborating with our gun show operators. I think this should set a national model. But despite that effort and the good faith efforts of law enforcement, lawmakers, and responsible gun owners, our state continues to face a plague of gun violence. So a year ago, we sat down and started asking ourselves, how can we get the answer to that question? Why are the guns getting in? Where are they coming from? Why are innocent people still getting shot by handguns in New York, even though we have some of the toughest handgun regulations in the country? The answers weren't obvious, but we knew we needed the data to truly understand the problem we're facing. So a little over a year ago, we made a major request of the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. We were the first state law enforcement agency in the country to request and be given comprehensive aggregate data tracking the state of origin of guns recovered from New York crime scenes. This had never been done before. And I do want to take a moment to thank the good people at the ATF, especially our colleagues at the National Tracing Center and the ATF's New York office. Without their help, we could not have obtained this data and produced this tracking index. When we finally got our hands on all of the data this summer, we were able to analyze the details of nearly 53,000 guns recovered by New York law enforcement. These are crime guns. And we were able to analyze the details of and look at for trends and patterns across every region of the state, from Buffalo to New York City to Long Island. We did not go into this analysis with any preconceived notions. People had guesses and suppositions, but we looked at the data and have relied completely on the data. There is no opinion in this report. There are some recommendations at the end, but it's all based on an analysis of data received from ATF. We were looking for answers on behalf of the people of New York, and we found some answers. So here is one of them. This is a gun that was picked up by my Organized Crime Task Force last year. It was initially sold in Florida before being trafficked into New York and got into the hands of a criminal who was trying to sell it on our streets. This gun represents the problem. This gun represents the dangers New York face from guns coming in from other states with weak gun laws. Our research found that 86% of all handguns covered at New York crime scenes came into New York from out of state. Overall, 74% of all guns in long guns and handguns recovered by law enforcement came out of state. But handguns like this one are the weapons of choice for gang members and most criminals. And 86% of them came from out of state. The message is that New York's laws, which require permits for handguns, are working. The bad guys aren't even trying to buy guns in New York. They know they have to get them from gun traffickers or travel to other states with weaker gun laws. The vast majority of the nearly 53,000 crime guns we analyzed were originally sold in just a handful of states with lax gun laws. The states that make up the so-called iron pipeline, Pennsylvania, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. And we added in Ohio, which is the seventh state, because in Western New York, a substantial portion of the guns recovered at crime scenes had originated in Ohio as well. So really, it's these 7 states that are producing most of the guns, the overwhelming majority of the guns used in crimes in New York. So please think about this. Handguns are the gun of choice for violent criminals. They are the gun of choice for gangs. They're most often used in homicides and violent gun crimes. We know that the gun that killed 2 NYPD officers in an ambush shooting in late 2014 was purchased from a pawn shop in Georgia. For just this reason, New York has made purchasing a handgun a very intensive process that includes fingerprinting, background checks, and even character references. Lawmakers, law enforcement, along with both gun control and gun rights advocates, have all been working together for years to make New York the safest we can. But despite our best efforts, we're being undermined at every turn by states who prioritize gun commerce over public safety. This is a common thread throughout the research we're making public today. Out of the nearly 53,000 crime guns recovered between 2010 and 2015, 3 out of every 4 guns originated out of state. That rate is more than double the national average, which tells you that it's hard for bad guys to get guns in New York, harder than in most states. That's why they're going to the iron pipeline. The rate is just as stark when you look at the guns that were most likely purchased with the intent of using them to commit a crime. One of the guns that we recovered within 3 years of their initial purchase were found at crime scenes. Now, if a gun is found at a crime scene within 3 years of its purchase, that's a good indication that it was probably bought in order to be used in a crime. Now, in fact, if you look at the stats, and this is all available online in the report, this is 1 year. Look how many of the guns that were found in crime scenes were found at a crime scene within 1 year of its purchase. That's a gun that was probably purchased with the intent to illegally traffic it. Of the guns that were recovered within 3 years of their initial purchase, 67% of these quick time to crime guns originated out of state. These trends hold up throughout New York State, by the way, though each region has its unique challenges. And to help our colleagues in every region of the state understand their particular gun problem, we're taking this critical data and putting it online in the hands of all New Yorkers, police, lawmakers, advocates, and everyday residents. Our new tracking analytics platform, which we're making available online today, empowers New Yorkers to understand exactly the nature of the gun problem their own community is facing. You can see if your community has a bigger problem with handguns or rifles. You can see how likely that a gun recovered in your city or town was trafficked from out of state. You can even see which states are supplying crime guns to your city, and there are substantial variations. The Tracing Analytics platform will be a powerful tool for everyone in New York, for community leaders and activists and legislators and local government officials throughout the state to better understand and tackle the gun violence epidemic in their own backyard. Of course, many New Yorkers are already working hard on this fight. My office has partnered with state and local police departments to crack down on gun trafficking. Perry and the rest of the Organized Crime Task Force has taken hundreds of illegal guns off the street and broken up dozens of violent gangs that traffic in guns and drugs. We've worked with local governments and on gun buyback programs, which have taken in nearly 1,200 guns across the state, and we've worked with the private sector, companies like Facebook, which worked with us to stop illegal online ads for guns. And as I noted earlier, I'm very proud of the work we did with New York's gun show operators to close the gun show loophole and make sure that in New York, unlike many other states, you simply cannot get out of a New York gun show with a gun you didn't bring in without showing a receipt for a background check. This is, again, a national model. But the point of the report today is to prove that no matter how tough your laws are, if we do not have better laws in other states and better laws at the federal level, guns will continue to flow into the hands of criminals. That's why, as a part of today's report, we're also recommending a series of steps, very modest steps, common sense steps, at the federal, state, and local level that can help us get a handle on this crisis. We propose, first, that the federal government should require universal background checks and follow New York's lead to close the gun show loophole. We were able to do it. There's no reason every other state can't do it. And the federal government, we think, should provide incentives to states that do this. Right now, 40% of gun sales in America don't require a background check. It's just too easy for a gun to get into the hands of someone who shouldn't have it. Second, the federal government should actually make gun trafficking a crime. If you can believe it, there is currently no federal law prohibiting gun trafficking. While there are federal statutes that are sometimes used to prosecute traffickers, there is no comprehensive law that criminalizes each stage of illegal gun trafficking. We have to fix that. Our own Senator Kirsten Gillibrand is sponsoring a bill to do that, and Congress should pass this legislation immediately. We also propose that the federal government should amend the restrictions that make it hard for ATF to share gun tracing data with institutions other than law enforcement. Any data at a more detailed level than what we're putting up on this platform is restricted to law enforcement now. Policymakers should be able to see this data as well. At the state level, all states should require that all handgun owners have to obtain a license. Permitting works. If a political candidate was to say Chicago has tough gun laws, but nonetheless they have a lot of shootings, this proves that it's not the problem of Chicago's gun laws not working. We're sure that the people in Illinois are going to want to follow our lead now that we've shown how this can be done. This proves that no matter how tough your gun laws are, bad guys can get the guns out of state. Again, 86% of the handguns used in crime came from out of state. The number's higher in New York City. It's over 90%. Bad guys are not even trying to buy the guns to use in crime in New York because they know our permitting laws are so tough. We have to deal with this as a national problem. If all other states followed our lead, we could keep handguns out of the hands of criminals while still ensuring access for all responsible gun owners. And finally, whether other states or the federal government act or not, New York must pass the gun kingpin bill, which imposes severe punishments on anyone who tries to traffic guns into New York. This bill is really the brainchild of my colleague, District Attorney Cy Vance, and it would require that anyone who sells more than 20 illegal guns can face 25 to life in prison. We've seen a similar law aimed at major drug traffickers have a significant deterrent effect. I was actually the author of that law. The state legislature should pass the gun kingpin bill, which is sponsored by Assemblymember Amy Paulin and State Senator Jeff Klein, and send a message to gun traffickers that doing business in New York is simply not worth the price. Ladies and gentlemen, there are times we're all overwhelmed by the scale and tragedy of the gun violence epidemic. But now more than ever, we have the tools, the details, the insight to make real headway in this fight. New York, again, is leading the way. The data we're releasing today makes it clear that our strong laws make it harder for criminals to get guns here, but the data also makes it clear that no state can deal with this crisis alone. We need stronger gun laws at the state and federal level, laws that support solutions that are based in evidence and data. New York is taking another significant step forward today with the data we release. The rest of the nation, we are confident, will follow our lead. Now I'd like to say a few words in Spanish, and then Eric will take questions. Es demasiado fácil comprar un arma en otros estados y traerlas a nuestras calles. 74% de las armas usadas en crímenes vinieron de otros estados. El Congreso debe ordenar un chequeo de antecedentes universal para todos. And with that, we'll open the floor for questions.
Give me your name and outlet, please. Eduardo Benitez, New York One Noticias. Attorney General, do you have, or your study has, any concrete evidence that stricter gun laws in other states are going to lead to fewer guns in New York State or lower crime?
Yes, because you can see from this data, and we're confident that other states are now going to follow our lead, so that we've shown the path of how to create these sort of a database. When you have fewer than 10% of the crime guns used in New York City being purchased in New York City, that tells you permitting rules work. So if the 6 states in the Iron Pipeline in Ohio had permitting rules that made it that hard to get a gun, that easy flow of handguns up to gangsters in New York, like the gun I just showed you, wouldn't take place. This proves that permitting rules work. And it also shows what happens when you have weak states with weak gun laws.
If I may, if you have drugs are illegal in the country and in New York State, and they still make their way to New York and New York State, what makes you think that stricter gun laws in other states are going to lead to fewer guns in New York State?
Because it's different. Virtually all, except for very strange cases like ghost guns, virtually every firearm used in a crime starts as a legal gun. It's not true of heroin or cocaine. They don't start off legal. It's hard to find them at the source. We know where the guns start. They start at gun stores in these other states, and now we're going to have the ability to actually see where the guns come from, and law enforcement is going to have the ability to target what I hope is going to be a relatively small number of gun sellers, gun stores, and individuals who purchase guns who clearly are involved in trafficking. But it's a completely different situation. Guns, it's not like down at the Glock factory, they say, time to stop making the legal guns, let's start making the illegal guns. That's not the way it works. They all start as legal guns, and that's a big difference.
Alex Jablon from the Trace. I'm curious what you know or don't know about the means of trafficking. For instance, like the FBI keeps a list of stolen guns, and I don't know if you're able to correlate this trace data to say how many of these guns were ultimately stolen, or were straw purchased, or just changed hands through many individuals.
Right. Well, we have this first level of data that we're releasing today will help everyone understand the flow of guns. Then it's up to us and our colleagues in local law enforcement to deal with the folks who are selling and purchasing the guns in the first place. One of the factors that we use in our analytics to develop our what we refer to as a gun trafficking index is whether or not the person who purchased the firearm is the same person who's the perpetrator who committed the crime. So if you combine fast time to crime, gun purchased somewhere else, shows up in a New York crime scene within a couple of years, and the fact that the name of the person who initially purchased the gun is not the same as the name of the perpetrator who had the gun, and then you add in that it was moved across a border, that basically is the recipe for telling how likely it was that a gun was bought to be trafficked. And that's why we've created a trafficking index, so you can rate on a scale of 1 to 100 the likelihood that a gun was trafficked. But we have the underlying data broken out also, and this is going to be a tremendous tool for our colleagues in law enforcement all across New York State, and ultimately, I hope, all across the country.
Brendan Walsh, WFPB. I'm just wondering if you've had any other conversations with any of the Iron Pipeline states or Ohio with lawmakers.
I have, and now that this data is out there, we will have more detailed conversations. But it's, look, I think this is something that I am very hopeful that the next presidential administration will take as a priority, provide incentives for states who do this kind of work and have the right permitting laws, provide incentives for states who close the gun show loopholes we have. I have spoken to some of my colleagues in other states, and I think we can expect in at least some of these states good cooperation from local law enforcement in our efforts to crack down on any particular dealers who are selling a lot of guns that show up in New York crimes.
More? Al Jones with 1010 Wins. Since New York can't really change the laws in other states, I see that New York is still the biggest source state for guns. Do you have a wish list of law changes you'd like to see that would help stop
Well,
sales here?
the gun kingpin trafficking statute is very important, and I don't understand why it's been really so hard to get done. It is got a sponsor in the Assembly, got a sponsor in the Senate. Cy Vance has been lobbying for it. I'm supportive of it, as is pretty much everyone in law enforcement. If you sell 20 or more guns, you should face a serious sanction. That is not someone who's just a casual gun user who sells a gun occasionally. But what we can see here is, while New York is the primary source, look at how many more guns come from other places. The aggregate of the guns coming from other states is much higher than the number of guns that come from New York. So once again, let's keep our eye on where the crimes are. Handguns, particularly guns like this. This is the gangster's dream gun. This is a semi-automatic 32 caliber that you can stick in your waistband. This is the kind of gun that is used to commit crimes. So this one came up from Florida, and it's something that we just have to put a stop to. We know our laws are effective. We know fewer bad guys are in many cases not even trying to buy handguns in New York. We just have to take the steps so they can't get them anyplace else.
Being members of New York, well, let's just follow up on that. We know, we've heard this year and year again, the guns are coming from down south, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. We know that. We talked about the presidential election, but the argument there is that those cultures down there are gun cultures. They believe folks should have the guns. What's your message to the people in those states who have to push the lawmakers to change the law?
So universal background checks are overwhelmingly popular. They're overwhelmingly popular with members of the National Rifle Association. And believe me, I go to gun shows. Again, when I became Attorney General, we started looking at gun trafficking issues for the first time the office really had dug in on this. We busted 6 gun shows where people were selling guns to people who clearly couldn't pass a background check. But then after we reached an agreement with those gun shows, we sat down with them and said, what would you do to make it impossible for someone to get out of your gun show without a background check? We came up with a set of model AG procedures. They seal the perimeter. They hire security guards, mostly off-duty cops, and we tag every gun going into a New York gun show. This is something we developed that no one else in the country has done. You cannot leave with a gun you didn't bring in without showing a receipt for a background check. The rank and file of the NRA overwhelmingly support this. I go around the state to gun shows, and every time I've gone, the operators of the gun show get on TV and say, we like doing this. They do not want guns to get into the hands of criminals or people with serious mental health issues. This is overwhelmingly popular, even in those states. It's just a matter of political will, and I'm hoping a little boost from the federal government to encourage them to do the right thing. But this is, the epidemic of gun violence has gotten the public's attention much more now than it has in the past. I think it was a long time ago that a Democratic candidate for president talked about guns and doing something about gun violence to the degree Secretary Clinton has. And the time is now to take action. The people of all of America want action taken on this critical issue. And with these analytics, we don't just have supposition, we have the hard evidence to show why these laws need to be changed, why we need universal background checks, why we need permitting for handguns every place in America.
Rich Lamb, WCBS. Mr. Attorney General, which state is the sort of champion state sending illegal guns up to us, if you will? Do you have them ranked?
We do. The data's all in the report, and you can see, Pennsylvania is, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Florida are pretty big, North and South Carolina. So
Now, if you could say that on mic, that would be helpful.
Okay. Yes, we have ranked the states, and the actual specific data is in the report that you can get available online. But it really is Pennsylvania, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. In Western New York, Ohio is a factor, Georgia and Florida. But that's it.
And you're optimistic that these states, I mean, they've been doing this for years and years, and this has been talked about for years, even though they didn't have the analytics that you now provide. Are you optimistic that they're going to change the rules?
I am, and I think there are things the federal government can encourage them, provide them incentives to change the rules. I mean, the federal government, every state has a Medicaid fraud control task force, because the federal government requires you to have one, and lobbies because it costs the federal government a lot of money, Medicaid fraud. But gun violence and gun death costs the federal government a lot of money too. If we treated guns, as many have said, as a public health issue, there's no argument against these things. And I do think political change is coming. I do think you are seeing the national conversation shift in a way that makes things possible that were never possible before. I mean, you're looking at the strangest election, certainly in my lifetime, and I thought New York mayoral 2013 would be hard to beat, but this one is even weirder than that. And there are a lot of things that are possible now that might not have been possible before. But for the first time ever, we can confront opponents with the hard evidence of where the guns are coming from, where they're going to. We look forward to similar analytics being developed by other cities that are suffering from plagues of gun violence, much worse than New York, by the way. New York is the safest big city in the country. Our colleagues at the NYPD are the best of the best, and we have very good state laws on gun regulation. There's no reason other states can't emulate it. Is there going to be some resistance in some places? Sure. But is this something that the public, even in these more conservative states, overwhelmingly supports? Absolutely.
What would be an incentive, if I could just follow? What, you talked about incentives, what?
Well, for example, there was a program that in the gridlock of Congress a few years ago, the funding got cut for decades under Democratic and Republican presidents. The federal government reimbursed police departments 50% of the cost of a bulletproof vest to encourage police departments to have bulletproof vests. The federal government provides incentives for states to do things all the time. And I think that there could be incentives provided to close the gun show loophole, as we did in New York, and to require background checks and permitting. So there are things that can be done at the federal level without having to deal with, it is, I hope that good sense will prevail and they'll pass Senator Gillibrand's gun trafficking bill. But even absent legislation, there are steps the federal government can take. And there are steps, look, there are a lot of advocates in Virginia and in North Carolina and in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has a Democratic governor, and it's a great guy running for Democratic AG, who I believe will be elected there this year. North Carolina, Virginia has a Democratic governor and a terrific Democratic AG, Mark Herring. I'm hopeful my colleague Roy Cooper, who's now the AG in North Carolina, will become the governor. So these are not states where there's zero possibility of cooperation. I think we're going to get some good results here, and I think people are going to look hard at what's going on in their states. We want to know who the individuals are who show up repeatedly as the purchasers of guns that end up at crime scenes. We're going to work that through with our colleagues.
Michael Aaron, how should the law department and the ATF address the T-HART amendment, which I think prohibits the release of this data, except for law enforcement on specific investigations as opposed to broad study?
Right.
Did you come up with a new theory, and can this be repeated across the country? And in fact, could you request the data for 50 states?
The answer is THART has never prohibited aggregate data. What it does make it hard to do is to provide any more detailed data than this to anyone other than law enforcement. So, for example, information about which specific gun store and what specific purchaser the gun found at a crime scene started with, that can't be revealed to anyone but law enforcement. And that's why one of my proposals is Congress should loosen up that requirement so policymakers like Assemblymember Kavanaugh can see what this data is.
Less specific or only aggregate?
The more specific stuff is only available to law enforcement. So that's what needs to be loosened up. But THART does not, obviously, we've got the data from them, and we went through this with ATF. It doesn't prohibit them from giving us this aggregate data so we can see how many crime guns came from Pennsylvania, but more specific, more granular data than that about the perpetrator of the crime, the identity of the purchaser of the gun. That is limited to law enforcement.
No, but did your law enforcement, did you request specific data, or you only requested aggregate?
No, we've requested all the data. I'm just telling you that what we're releasing today is all we are currently allowed to share with the public.
So you have it, but you can't release it?
We have it. It can't be released to the general public. We will have more to say about that in a future date, but we do think that one of the priorities for the new Congress should be loosening up these requirements, because policymakers should be able to understand this. Policymakers, frankly, in Pennsylvania and North Carolina should understand, I suspect, and I don't know, we'll look if we follow the data, that a relatively small number of gun stores are probably responsible for a lot of the guns that show up in crime scenes. And there's some very responsible gun store owners who actually will be big beneficiaries of this data, because we'll be able to show who are the good guys and who aren't. We are having a lot of last questions here.
Two questions. First, what is the crime gun recovery rate in Suffolk and Nassau counties? And second, just on a policy level, why should states like Pennsylvania, South Carolina have gun rights restricted there if we can't control our criminals here?
Well, we can. We are stopping criminals from buying handguns in New York. They have to go out of state. In New York City, more than 90% of the handguns used in crimes come from somewhere else. So you can control criminals' ability to purchase handguns. And we do have the stats by region. In fact, the interactive tool, when you go online, will enable you just to punch on Suffolk or Nassau and see where the guns come from and what the total is. On Long Island, the total guns recovered in our study were 4,844, percent originating out of state 73%. And the total recovered handguns out of that were 3,881. So we have it broken down. We have New York broken down into 7 different regions where almost virtually all of the gun crimes occur. And we've provided analytics for each region so our colleagues in local law enforcement and in journalism and in the legislature and local government can see them.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.